Thanks, Phil. Thank you, Phil, for that great introduction, and welcome, everyone. I see some familiar faces. Blaine, it's been a while. It's an honor to be here. I've been involved on the periphery in this event for the last couple of years, but excited to be opening the session for this week. And one of the main reasons is it's an opportunity to have a dialogue. So many of the conferences that we go to, you just get spoon-fed a bunch of slides from vendors and not a lot of opportunity to challenge some thinking and some thoughts. And we hope to be able to do that, not only as researchers, but as peers on stage with you. And I'm one of 5 IDCers that's going to be participating over the next couple of days. We've also got Bill Keyworth, Lars Goranson, Nigel Wallace, and Ron Babin, all from IDC. So engage with us. I'm here till the end of tomorrow, flying out Wednesday morning, but happy to be involved on an ongoing basis. So my role here today in the opening keynote is to talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the market in Canada and some of our peer research for you folks. You get the opportunity to be one of the first audiences to see our 21st annual Top Executive Study, a few findings from that. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the use cases and examples of digital transformation. So my talk is The Art and Science of Digital Transformation, Technology and Business Redefined. Here we go. Can we just get both the preview and the slide live on the comfort monitor, please? Thanks. So before we dive into the meat of the content, some of that peer research, I want to talk about Rembrandt van Rijn, one of the Dutch masters from over 300 years ago. He died in 1669. He was one of the most famous Dutch painters of the Dutch masters era in the 1700s. He created over 300 famous pieces of work, but he left a great legacy. And now there's a new Rembrandt, the next Rembrandt. This is not a painting that was found in an attic, and the slide will show it in a minute when it gets on there. Folks, do we have that slide up? Thanks. So this is the next Rembrandt. A computer has made a Rembrandt painting, and it's perfect. You may have seen the articles last year in 2016. A team of data scientists, artists, and multidisciplinary participants put together what is effectively a machine learning algorithm to examine all the works of art of Rembrandt and create a brand new painting based on his work. They analyzed over 300 paintings. They analyzed everything from the distance between the eyes, facial features, and so forth to recreate his style. They used image analytics and 3D printing, some of the newest technologies available, to recreate and transform something digital into a piece of art. Sure, it created a lot of controversy. Should we be recreating something from a Dutch master? But this was all about the art of what's possible. And it was done by J. Walter Thompson as essentially a publicity stunt or a campaign to think outside the box for their client ING group. So the next Rembrandt. And why do I bring this up to talk about digital transformation and in this enterprise transformation exchange here? Well, it's all about thinking about transformation in 2 spheres. It's part art, it's part science. They used digital technologies, data, the way Rembrandt used his paint and his paint brushes. So think of transforming the art world today, such an analog business, if you will, or a craft, and you can be able to apply those technologies to any business environment that you can think of. So that brings us to our main opening, talking about digital transformation, the coupling of technologies with organizational, operational, and business model innovation to create new ways of operating and growing businesses. Our graphic here talks about the third platform. This is the foundation of all of the innovation and investment we've seen in our industry over the last decade. Mobility, big data analytics, cloud, social business, and surrounding that, some of the technologies that we're going to talk about over the next few days, like artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, robotics, 3D printing, and so forth. But the important thing to think about in digital transformation is what does it mean for you in your line of business and as IT professionals, IT leaders? One of the things that we are learning is the business unit heads outside of IT are still not getting it in terms of understanding the potential for disruption. So my job is to show you kind of where you are in your peer set and then think about some creative ways of looking outside of that. So in our top executive survey, we talk about transformation and the IT priorities and business priorities. But what are some of the major drivers of transformation? Fundamentally, it's about improving customer experience. So fundamentally changing and improving what you do to serve your customers. This is what drove Starbucks to build its own mobile application and mobile payment system to overcome that friction of being able to serve coffee to individuals like myself who'd rather not speak a sentence first thing in the morning and just do a mobile order and pay, right? This is what drives all of us to move a lot more of our shopping online. It's simply improving customer experience. Second, establishing new lines of business. Being able to take the data that you have and put that into a new operation, and I'll give a few examples later on. Third, monetizing data assets. The way that companies like Verizon and TELUS are using their mobile data that they've gathered through their cellular network and using that for advertising and aggregating and being able to use it for municipal planning, for locating a hospital based on routes and traffic and so forth. And finally, something that we often overlook, attracting and sourcing and retaining talent. So digital technologies can be used to transform how you're engaging with your employees. Everyone likes to talk about how millennials are hitched to their smartphone and technologies. There's people too as well, and they need nurturing and different ways of engaging. And that's why companies like Ford Canada brought in gamification into their training programs to engage their employees, to make sure that they were taught in a way that helped them be more effective as salespeople and service people at the retail and dealer outlets. So lots of drivers of transformation, but the biggest one is survival. You know, if we take a look at what's happening in business today, it's now a concern for the C-level. Many executives are being pushed out because they're not agile enough and rapidly evolving in a rapidly changing economy. So in our top executive survey, one of the key questions we ask every year is, what is your top business priority for the year ahead? And for the last couple of years, we've seen this rise to the top, which is operational efficiency and productivity gains. We know Canadian organizations are lagging in terms of innovation. We need to do more as a society, but also the boardroom has made it clear that we need to innovate faster. But I'm wondering if that incremental innovation is enough. Should we be focusing more on those big bang, those rapid innovations that really change? Well, it's going to come down to the mindset of your organization and part art and part science. You can see also number 2, market expansion. There's a focus on being able to spread your wings and move into new markets, whether it's a market international or something in an adjacent business model. And tied to that, obviously, number 3, sales and marketing initiatives at 13%. So these are the top business priorities for organizations, your peers that we see across Canada. Now let's talk about what are the, what's trickling in the background when we're thinking about digital transformation. We asked these questions for the last couple of years to get a sense of what's the mindset, where do we think we are, and we divide the responses into business unit responses or IT responses. So technology is disrupting our industry now and is requiring our organization to change quickly. You can see that your peers in IT definitely see this and agree with this. The ability to integrate technologies with processes, the ability to look at opportunities based on technology. And this one towards the bottom, number 4, data is the most important asset the organization owns. I find it fascinating that 83% of IT respondents agreed with that to some degree, either fully agreeing or somewhat agreeing. So being able to harness the value of that data is critically important to being able to compete in the economy today. And then finally, that last statement, which I think is pretty bold. I can't say that every company is in the information-based business, but I'd say IDC is. We're going to start facing new competitors ourselves. It's something that we talk about at the most senior levels of our company. So these are some of the background drivers of what's causing change in industry today. But another key finding from our top executive survey is that business executives are still not forecasting that disruption that those of us in technology have seen. So you can see that if you group the somewhat disruptive and very disruptive, when we ask, how disruptive will digital transformation be for you in the next couple of years, business executives' opinions are lagging those of IT. So the big question is, what do you need to do to help these folks along? We are seeing some evidence of digital transformation. One is the creation of a new chief digital officer. So 38% of organizations that we surveyed said they have a new office or officer that is charged specifically with overseeing DX initiatives. That's up from last year. Second, 69% of organizations are deepening their relationships with customers through digital transformation initiatives. This is ground zero, being able to interact with your customer where it's convenient for them, context aware, location aware. Very critical aspects of what we're talking about here. And thirdly, 78% of organizations are saying they're using DX to re-enable new processes or recreate processes. This is what, in many ways, is what the Internet of Things is all about. And Nigel Wallace will be talking about IoT on Wednesday afternoon, so stay tuned for that session. He's going to get into some really interesting use cases of IoT. It's all about automation. So this shows some evidence of change, but there's still a lot more work to be done. Because what we see today is only 1/3 of Canadian companies have a formal digital transformation strategies, and only 4% say it's fully integrated into their core business. So lots of work to be done. 43% say it's currently being built. So we're making some progress year after year. But remember that pace of change, that treadmill is tilting higher and the speed is picking up. And competitors from Asia and the US and South America are also moving in the same direction, being able to transform their business. One of the things we did last year, and this was parallel to some studies in US and Europe, was do a maturity model examination of digital transformation in Canada. And this is how the results shook out, which is about 2% are in what we call the digital disruptor or optimized stage. 11% are almost there in that managed stage. 24% are digital players, but almost 2/3 were in those lower two stages. Really, a lot of disconnected processes, not consistent in terms of customer experience, not repeatable, not across the organization. So our goal as a company is to help provide the tools, and in forums like this, to help organizations move up this pyramid or this maturity model. For comparison purposes, we had about 20% more companies in those lower two stages than the US and about 18% lower than Europe. So we were lagging, and this is in 2016. We're going to do a bit of a different study in 2018 to do a measurement, and that's actually looking at the business model outcomes and comparing that to different stakeholders in the organization. One of the things that concerned us when we saw this is that those that are early leaders, those 13% in those top two maturity stages, they're starting to break away. We're seeing a greater digital divide, and there's a fear that many organizations are going to be left behind if they aren't making change today. So keep an eye on that, and we'll be talking about what it is that organizations can do to make sure that they're not falling behind. I often get questions about, well, give me some examples of companies in these organizations. I won't pick on anyone in those lower two segments, but think of a local hairdresser or a delivery company that is still kind of mostly analog, maybe have a bit of payment systems, and perhaps they can track a package or a parcel, but they really haven't transformed that customer experience to be seamless. In the repeatable stage, what we would call a digital player, I found, from a cursory analysis, I think Intact Insurance would be a good example. They were one of the first companies to have an innovation lab doing some neat things. I think they launched theirs in 2015. They were fairly early in the usage-based insurance. They're doing some cool things in terms of being able to communicate with their customers online in a new way. And this is all in a fairly regulated business environment. So Intact is kind of on the right track. I would put the advanced manufacturer Technion. They're a global manufacturer with the headquarters in Toronto. They're R&D focused, very design focused. They were one of the first companies that we heard of using 3D printing for prototyping purposes. They are cloud first for a number of their applications. And they're also very nimble. They've also launched some side businesses based on their own technology, and that was only due to the fact that they had the ability to launch a separate materials division, one that you could pick your own cloth and so forth, that was adjacent to their core business of finishing, manufacturing furniture for offices and so forth. So Technion would be in that digital transformer category. And then a company you may have seen some advertising lately was Wealthsimple. They are a mobile-first, cloud-first digital wealth management company. And they iterate very fast. They have a rapidly onboarding customer base. They are changing the way customers can invest, and they're one of the so-called robo-advisor companies. And it's one of the things that they felt is there was a niche in the market. Younger consumers in Canada didn't want to go to business with some of the legacy financial institutions, and they quickly moved into that space, and they've done very successfully, launched a number of new products and are growing quite rapidly. So we would hold them up as a digital disruptor in Canada. So those are 3 Canadian examples. I think we can dig more, and you can talk to my colleagues about examples in other countries as well. So where is the pressure coming? The pressure to transform, to digitally transform, is actually mainly internal to the organization. And this is the first time we've asked this question in our top executive survey. So internal pressure for growth, obviously internal pressure for growth has its place in terms of driving strategy, and it's better to be coming internal than getting blindsided. So to me, this is a good sign rather than it always being externally driven, because once you're being disrupted, it's perhaps too late. Once you've observed that change in the marketplace, change in pricing, change in market share, rapid declines in stock price, and so forth. So it would be interesting in some of our discussions to talk to you folks in our panels, in our fireside chats, that where is the pressure or the implication for change happening in your organization? So what does all this mean for IT, and what can you do about it? I think the most important thing is IT is needed to help in that digital transformation. DX doesn't happen on its own, it has to be built. So this comes from our global research, and Bill, you might recognize this. The most important role IT could play in your digital transformation, number 1, innovation. Help business units identify which parts of their business could be digitally transformed through the use of technology. They may have some insights, they may have talked to different providers and application vendors, but they want a bigger picture, and you can provide that sort of vetting and an approach that's thoughtful to integrating new technologies to their lines of business. Second, identify emerging technologies that could accelerate their own digital transformation. So innovation, technology, and then third, project management. We know that many projects are initiated by line of business are often thrown back to IT to manage. So that's a big challenge. So project management is the third skill set that line of business needs from the IT department. And what's being measured in a lot of technology projects? We asked this in our top executive survey. The business outcomes that we're seeing: operational cost reduction, employee productivity, customer satisfaction, formal ROI metrics, and increased revenue. Now this is a multiple selection, so we could have different sorts of measures in this ability to measure what the outcomes are. And we saw earlier that IT is far more advanced in their thinking about the potential for disruption. So one of the jobs that you are going to have to do is work with your suppliers to say, help us measure the business outcomes that are important to my internal clients. And one of the things that we found that as familiarity of digital transformation rises, so does the ability to measure business outcomes. So you have to educate, talk about those emerging technologies, think about innovation, and how that can be integrated and incorporated into their business model, and show where is the operational cost going to come from. Because one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing in the industry is suppliers aren't doing a great job of getting the maximum ROI out of technology investments. We've tracked that for a number of years in our top executive survey. So IT has to be a bit of a conduit, a partner between the supplier as well as the line of business constituents that you're helping support. The other big thing, and this probably comes as no surprise, is get a handle on security. Security is now the #1 IT concern of the line of business. In 2016, it was #3. Lots of headlines this year about data breaches and hacks and privacy concerns. It is now the #1 job or concern that business has with IT supporting the business, in addition to agility, the ability to adjust or move their business quickly, and reliability. We also found that 69% of respondents say that IT security and security of data and systems is a critical concern or a major challenge for their business unit. So I think 2018 is going to be a very interesting year. Are concerns around security going to stop your investment in digital transformation? Is it going to hold up your ability to serve customers and be more seamless in terms of a customer experience? Or are you going to tackle it head on, be proactive about security? Because this is a pretty scary stat. This comes from my colleague, David Senth. And he polled a number of providers and consultants in the security space in Canada, understanding how long it took to know a breach happened. And the length of time security consultants and vendors say the average Canadian organization could detect a breach. This is the distribution. Only 5% within a few hours, 34% within a week, 18% within a month, and it gets worse from there. 31% of organizations within a year, and even 12% more than a year. So if we're going to transform, we have to understand what are the risks that we have to mitigate. I'm not here with the answers. This is part of the discussion over the next couple of days. But keep this in mind as we think of the backdrop of transformation and that push and pull about how much data do we have access to, where is it stored, who has access to it, and that end-to-end security discussion. Automation is another big challenge, and this is where IT, again, has to evolve in terms of building the business case for transformation. 68% of IT managers admit their IT operations are mostly manual. The middle point is actually pretty startling. 6 months on average from when a company identifies a business need. Hey, I want to get an application that allows me to track my customer journey from A to B physically in the store. That takes, on average, 6 months. What are the outliers, right? 18 months, 12 months? That's too slow in this day and age. And finally, 2 months. That's the more time that IT would actually prefer to spend on innovation rather than that maintenance work, keeping the lights on and so forth. So this is elusive because we're pushed and pulled in so many different directions. So switching gears a little bit, one of the things that we also want to do is get to know different stakeholders, line of business stakeholders' needs. This is an example of marketing. We surveyed about 79 marketing executives in Canada and asked them how they spend their technology by marketing function. As an IT leader, you may want to be in those discussions and understand, okay, what is it about marketing communications and the activities and the processes involved there that require you to spend 1/5 of your dollars on that function? Why aren't we spending less on that, more in something like website or content? We had a roundtable last week with a number of CMOs talking about getting a reaction to this very slide, and most of the folks in the room said, we spend a lot more on content and website than what's shown here. So it's interesting to see how a marketer sees their priorities and their spending allocation versus what you folks might understand as being important to them. So dig a little deeper in terms of their line of business needs, and you might find some interesting breakdowns in terms of perspectives. So I want to go through a few examples that give us some perspectives on transformation in terms of new innovations, some startups, some very large companies, and help shape our discussion for the next couple of days. So this is an interesting startup, Smart Halo. They're from Quebec, based in Montreal. They invented a product in the last couple of years that was driven out of a need to be safer and more secure in terms of cycling. Montreal is a very cycling-friendly urban environment, and the two founders said, let's make a product that will allow us not to have to reach into our pocket for our smartphone to find directions and so forth. And they built this very elegant Halo product that locks into the handlebars of your bicycle and gives you very simple directions based on color codes and shapes. It tracks your fitness, it gives you navigation capabilities, and a number of other stats. It also has a really cool alarm system called Bike Defender. And when you lock up your bike, it will detect, based on motion, if there's an attempt for it to be stolen, and an alarm will go off, and it'll signal your phone as well. So really cool invention. It was help funded by a Kickstarter about 2 years ago, and they sell their app as part of the package. It's like a $200 device, and it's on the Apple iOS store. So one pretty cool invention that I think kind of gets us thinking about different ways we can use mobile technology in a context that brings together different APIs, location-based information, as well as a number of different technologies that are tethered effectively to your smartphone. Pretty cool stuff out of Quebec. Another Quebec-based company called CAF Action, they had a challenge in terms of how to service their coffee machines. So CAF Action sells, or rents out, if you will, a coffee service to enterprises if they want to provide coffee to their employees. And we actually have a service, but it's not CAF Action, and it's always a drag when we're out of beans or the water isn't flowing right or what have you. They had the same problem, and they had put a Wi-Fi monitor in the back of their machine. That wasn't working as well either because it had to be managed by IT. If you're in IT, do you want to do service calls for the coffee machine? No, probably not. So they actually converted that to a cellular module, and they're able to track the levels of coffee and usage and so forth. And it really helped improve customer service while also reducing costs. So you can see the quote here from the president. Over 90% of service calls are based on a machine being down, and I think something like $200 on average per call. So they were able to improve that coffee service for their customers, and they provided better visibility, they saved costs, they reduced downtime, and they also, CAF Action sells through resellers, and the resellers were able to have their own management apps, so they got into the software as a service business. So there was a goodness all the way through the supply chain, from the customer to the intermediary, all the way up to the manufacturer. So this is an example of a connected product and a subset of what we see in the Internet of Things space that Nigel's going to talk about in a couple of days. Another really interesting example of where analytics can be brought in, beyond that example with Rembrandt van Rijn, which is sometimes organizations who are at their best, they feel that they've done enough. Well, take an example of curling. Rachel Homan was Canada's best curler, and in the springtime, we saw her run the table at the World Championships. She went 13-0, and that was the first time ever. But behind that, it wasn't just fitness and skill. What they brought in was an analytics expert, and he worked with them. Adam Kingsbury worked with them for a number of months, analyzing their shots and their performance. And this game it's almost perfect for analytics and data crunching, because you can track so many different things, like the speed of the rock, the spin, the location, your shot accuracy, and so forth. So Kingsbury's role was all about giving advice to Homan, the skip, so she could make better decisions. Analytics was augmenting her skill set and her intuition, but it wasn't replacing her. It's sort of the fear about what's AI and cognitive going to do for our job market. Sure, some jobs are going to go away, but in this case, the computer wasn't going to do the curling. It was able to provide that extra information. Maybe it's 5% improvement from last year's tournament to this year. And this is an example where there was no complacency. She was the best curler in Canada, and they got even better and became the best in the world. So take that as a lesson to never rest on your laurels in terms of where you are. One other thing to keep in mind is the notion of scale and the importance of automation and why scale matters. And in the case of Amazon Prime Day, I saw a blog post a few weeks ago that was really eye-opening in terms of just the massive volume. Not just the retail side. I think they had 60% growth year over year on their sales. They beat their Black Friday and their Cyber Monday sales. This was back July 11th. Just the resource calls on AWS. So, for example, and this delivery time is unbelievable. They had their record delivery time was somewhere in California. I think they have some roving trucks. 12 minutes from click to physical delivery. That was their best. I can't even put my shoes on and get out to a store and buy something that fast. So that's one example. When we're talking about the cloud resources that are required, in that 24-hour period, they had 3.34 trillion, that's trillion with a T, database requests. Just a massive scale. They had 52 petabytes of data transferred during the shopping period. A lot of it was commerce related, a lot of it was back-end supply chain, stuff that the average consumer wouldn't see. And finally, they had 419 calls to APIs through that shopping period. So this is why it's such a challenge today to compete in the retail environment, because Amazon is relying on its partner, AWS, for some of these skills. Now, I'm not saying this is the only organization that can do this, but it shows you what is possible. The art and the science of transforming business. Retail is changing because of events like Amazon Prime Day. So one of the things that we see organizations doing is thinking about this in different ways. So let's go back to basics. Let's start talking about R&D at a small scale, and we're calling these innovation centers. We're actually accounting for something like 800 innovation centers in Canada now have propped up over the last few years. And that's about continuously reinventing and challenging yourselves as a core competency, not as some special project. It's all about this being ongoing. We don't just launch one application and put it on the App Store and walk away. There's continual reinvention and continuous improvement. And we asked our ITAP, our IT advisory panel, why are you involved in innovation centers? And the top objective was to accelerate that speed of innovation in the organization. It's not to showcase, it's not a customer showcase center, it's not for the benefit of the employees, although that's another point of engagement. It's all about speeding up that pace of change and trying things new. And then we asked, what are the success criteria for your innovation center? Number one, get that executive and senior management buy-in. Too many times it's stuffed in the corner and we don't see enough of that bubbling up to the surface. So you have to get that buy-in from the top of the organization for it to be successful. It has to be cross-functional, number two. Involve different teams. It's not just a marketing problem. It's not just an operations problem or an IT problem. It is an innovation center that involves lots of different disciplines, kind of like the way that the next Rembrandt project involved artists, designers, and analytics specialists. And it has to be funded. This stuff doesn't happen for free, but be creative. Look to your partners for some funding models to build an innovation center and be able to track that performance over time and look at the right skills. You can partner with universities sometimes. Get involvement from your customers. Think about that. How can a customer help involve your thinking or evolve your thinking in terms of innovation? So some food for thought as you go through the next few days. So finally, all the points I covered today would fall under one of these 5 pillars of digital transformation, whether it's a leadership challenge, being able to see that vision from the top, that customer or omni experience challenge, being able to blend that, have that seamless experience in store or in bank versus online or in the branch. Information transformation. How can you evolve your data warehousing strategy, your analytics strategy? Where are you going to start looking at machine learning and eventually cognitive and AI solutions? And operating transformation. What new business units can you spin out based on your core competency and that data as a strategic asset. And finally, perhaps the toughest, which is work source transformation, the different ways that you can bring talent on board. An ecosystem approach is what's needed today, not just hiring from within, but partnering with universities, institutions, startups, and other companies of various sizes that have a shared set of values, a shared set of goals. So all of our research at IDC is around digital transformation ties back into one of these 5 pillars. And you're going to hear a lot more from Bill Keyworth, my colleague, this evening, and again this morning. I encourage you to pay close attention to his advice and guidance. So some of the key takeaways. Digital transformation is both an art and science. So the right brain, left brain concept. On one side, you need that leadership, that engagement, that creativity, collaboration with partners and customers, and opinions that are informed by the left brain, data and information. How do you measure success? How are you going to measure the business outcomes and show those proof points to your line of business and help them advance their thinking about transformation and disruption? And how are you going to automate and scale up? Because that's going to be a big challenge. So, one last point for you folks, a question I'll leave with you is, as we think about the art of what's possible and the art and science of digital transformation, who's your industry's next Rembrandt? Is it going to be you or one of your rivals? Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Tony. We're not going to let you go yet. Can't go yet. Now, all of the IDC analysts will be here. As Tony said, he'll be here tomorrow. He has a table, and they all have tables in the back. If you don't have one-on-ones with them, I highly suggest you grab these guys. This is a wealth of knowledge. It's free. IDC free, right?
I'm here.
Anyways, but please, if you any questions for Tony right now on a great presentation. Yes.
Just a quick question.
Could you please, could you? Was going to say that right after. Yes, you will. You will. And if you do have questions, if you could just say your name and your company too, please. Yeah.
So I'm actually Paul Samagidelis. I'm Phil's partner at nGage. 2 things that you don't escape a conference with is here and mitigate risk, or that chasm between IT and line of business. Tell me and argue why it actually is a good thing at some points in a digital transformation process. Because I agree, when I see a LinkedIn post and they say we're going to automate all salespeople, 95% of them will be gone. You know, if someone's a VP of sales, they say there's other nuances involved. And vice versa, if I see some change that's going to open up risk to the company, IT should get a handle on it. But at some point, isn't that separation, because they're disparate functions, a good check and balance type approach for an enterprise not to rush in and fail?
Oh, I think for sure the different lines of business are going to have a viewpoint, and they'll be informed about the functions and processes that can be improved or enabled by technology. I think what we've seen over the last decade or so is that IT leaders are moving from a control standpoint to being more of an orchestrator, right? So it's great to have, you want to have debates in the organization about things like who owns the customer data? How fast can we move this within this regulatory regime? Things like personally identifiable information. The laws are and the regulation is very different in the US versus Canada. So that's going to change, for multinationals or companies that are expanding from the US into Canada or vice versa, they need to know the nuances of that. So it's a good point. There has to be that debate and dialogue back and forth. And I think it's sort of like the organization can be a bit left brain, right brain, art and science, and having that constant dialogue is critical, and it's healthy within any organization.
Tony, thank you very much.
Thanks.